Hey there, YouTube folks. Welcome to another video on this channel, Esco Capivara. Get your heart ready, because I'm going to bring you from afar the scariest game that happened at the Las Vegas event, and it was played between two monsters, Magnus Carlsen and Erigaisi. Erigaisi, who is currently number 5 in the world, against Magnus. And in this game, something completely absurd happened. Because you know that a rook is worth more than a knight. That's right, Raphael, I've already learned that. Really? Is it really worth more? In this game, Magnus is going to try to prove to you that it's not. A knight can be worth more than a rook. Raphael, what nonsense, man. Let's take a closer look at this, because in fact, this game is something brutal, scary, and it's chilling. And I'll say more, it's a game to watch lying on the floor. If you're sitting or standing, be careful. You might end up falling during the excitement of the game and even hurt yourself. Be careful, pay attention, and let's check out one of the most brilliant games I've ever seen. Now, with the white pieces, Magnus Carlsen faces Erigaisi in a chaotic position. Pieces scrambled and full of drama. We'll quickly review the opening. Magnus began with c4. It's Fischer random, not the English, and he's fianchettoing his kingside bishop to g2. Let's skip to the game's most crucial moment. Magnus played on the queenside and centralized, Erigaisi exchanged on a5, and now we're reaching the key part of the game. Ignore the early moves. They pale in comparison to what's next. Bishop e7 and the Indian played g, preparing to castle. And that's going to happen. Castling was played, and you can see that the position is already turning into a much more normal chess position that we're used to, the regular kind. Look from this point on. Magnus plays knight to d2. He's maneuvering. Bishop to 5 Eric's idea is to pin this knight so it can't jump to the c4 square. Torridome played the move knight to d5, and here is where the brilliance of the game begins. All this is planned. Magnus's idea is moving the rook to c2. What does he mean? He wants to double up, remove the bishop from this diagonal, and later move the knight to a4 to pressure d5. Noruga's plan. Time was well managed. Now tactical factors arise. At this moment, Erigaisi plays bishop to b4, pressuring both rooks. You can't allow that, so Magnus plays the move b3, but now he weakens the c3 square. Raphael, I'm starting to get the idea. That's exactly the point you have to make. Notice that the attacked bishop goes back to d7, and now Magnus plays knight. e4, there it is. He puts pressure on that bishop, puts pressure on c5. Eriga defends against both threats. And here comes the doubling, and it seems that at this moment, Magnus gains a strategic advantage. Erigaisi has a weakness on the e5 pawn, but here, the Indian genius. Look at what Erigaisi does at this moment. He plays queen b5. He not only defends, but also threatens the bishop. And this is by far the most important moment of the game. This is where I wanted to get to. We could even start the game from this point because, look, this bishop can't just move anywhere. Can't go to b4 or c3 either. Raphael, don't state the obvious. I see the pawn is taking. Show some respect. I've always respected you, and I'll never disrespect you again. Magnus doesn't have the natural move, bishop to d2. Why? Because he gets a 5, and here he loses the knight. The knight has nowhere to jump. So that's the point. Magnus here, he spent some time on the clock and played the engine move, which is bishop to e1. Why? Against f5, he plays knight. Against f5, he plays knight to d2. But there's another tactical theme going on between the lines. Notice Erigaisi chose this line, playing f5, forcing knight to d2 to avoid losing the piece. Now comes the most important moment because Erigaisi plays knight to c3, which is brutal. Look at what is going to happen now. Get your room ready, hold tight to your chair, because here Eriga touches the queen, and with the most natural move, which is queen to d2, you lose the e2 pawn with a fork. And here you get lost, completely lost. And notice that Magnus played everything instantly. Magnus played the brilliant move a rook takes c3, sacrificing the exchange, which Eriga recaptured with a pre-move, and knight to e4 was played. Look at the images, both moves were executed quickly. In other words, Magnus had already calculated this. And for a normal person like me or you, who follows chess and understands a position like this, it seems that Magnus is worse. He traded a rook for a knight. He must be worse here. But he's not. This highlights a key aspect of chess. strategic understanding, not just tactical calculation, but rather the evaluation of the position. And what is Magnus seeing? That there are no open files for Erigaisi's rooks. That's what Magnus saw at that moment. And Magnus is saying that this knight is actually worth more than a rook. It sounds like madness, a terrible joke, but Magnus has to justify this through his moves. Because that's the only way we'll believe this. From here, since Erigaisi has an extra piece, he uses a classic Capablanca strategy. Which one? I have an extra piece, so I trade everything and win. That's what Erigaisi will do next. Watch. And it starts right now. He plays bishop to 6, of course. He wants to trade, since he has an extra piece. Magnus here recovers this pawn. He takes on c3. He follows his plan. He takes on g2 king. To g2 improves the queen's position with a check. Magnus plays f3, and now bishop to 6 is Capablanca's plan. He trades everything, leaving just a knight versus a rook. I have a material advantage as black. Magnus, at this point, plays queen to d2, already keeping an eye on this exchange that's coming. He won't be able to avoid it. Erigaisi improves it further. The position of his queen. Magnus takes on f6, and Erigaisi maintains his structure by recapturing with the rook. This shows Capablanca's strategy in action. Magnus is down the exchange, knight for rook. Now, it's a standard chess position focused on strategy, tactics, and evaluating the situation. The world wondered, even watching live, what Magnus was doing. It's incredible. The engine says Magnus is slightly better here, which seems odd since he's down the exchange. But Magnus sees that, besides black not having any open files for the rooks to move, Magnus has this knight entry on c5 that he can prepare at the right moment. The move f4 isn't possible yet because it's pinned, but the knight is very well placed on a central square. It still seems to me that black should be better here. Now, look at what Magnus plays. He plays queen to c5. And the idea behind this move is that he wants to trade queens. He trades queens and goes into an endgame where he believes his knight is superior to a rook. Now, Erigaisi doesn't want to trade at this moment. What is he going to do? Erigaisi played rook to f8, saying, if you want to trade, go ahead, since it would help me regroup my pawns and possibly open a file for my rooks later. Magnus seems to be standing still at this moment, but he's not actually standing still. He has a strategy that's being guided like something out of a witch's cauldron, something terrible. Erigaisi isn't trading or improving the knight with f4 yet, so he improves his king's position, gives it an escape square, and there are still many moves left. Magnus keeps waiting with h4. That's the idea behind this move. It's also strategic, and we start to understand it. On the next move, Erigaisi keeps waiting with rook to c6, suggesting that at some point he might try to bring the rook to the a file. At this moment, Magnus fixes the king side. So this is a very long-term idea. Magnus is fixing the structure here. Now, Erigaisi plays d4, saying, I'll slightly improve my queen's position. If you trade, I'll take here, and this knight can never jump, otherwise you open the file. At this point, we start to see that Magnus really has a plan. In this position, play on the queen's side. It seems absolutely crazy, but he takes advantage of a tactical moment and plays b4 from here on. Keep the kids out of the room. Everything is brutal and scary. Of course, he already started with that sacrifice back there. And the idea is that Magnus wants to create a pawn majority and push a pawn on the queen side, which seems like the most absurd thing in the world. And he takes advantage of the queen on d4, look at that, because you can't take here, otherwise you hang your queen. And if you trade queens, I come in with the knight on c5. That was all I wanted as white. Eriga, at this moment, just stands there. Raphael, but he can't really trade here. It doesn't seem that bad because after recapturing, rook c7. I know Magnus wants to take this pawn, but now comes the doubling. And here it seems like things are organized for black. Open file, exactly. But look at the power of the knight. I have a pawn on the 6th rank, and you can't take the rooks off. Otherwise, I'm pushing this thing. And then comes f4, and the king is coming up too. Look at that. He's lost here. Incredible. The power of this knight on e5. Eriga calculated everything in detail and said, I shouldn't have allowed that b4. And he plays rook e8. He just stands there. Eriga with rook for knight just stands there and is already getting a bit pressed on the clock, and Magnus pushes the pawn to b5. And now the idea of a 4 of 5 becomes clear. It still looks like this could go wrong. Well, Erigaisi has his rook under threat. He moved the rook back to c8, and Magnus actually plays the move a4, and it looks like white has a plan. The position is balanced, but there's a plan. The pawns are advancing. Notice that Erigaisi is still just standing there. He's not using the rooks yet, and Magnus, careful, I need to pay attention, as a pawn may break through soon. Now Eriga moves his king to f8, improving its position. He's improving the rooks, staying put, and watching Neruga. Magnus makes progress again, rook to b2. Notice he never lacks a plan. He's always active. Now he's preparing ideas like b6 at the right time. It's tricky because if b6 happens, I take, you recapture, and you open the file for me, which my rooks lacked. What is Magnus doing? Erigaisi moved ahead. That's a prophylactic move in advance. If you play b6, look at how he's already got the rook on the open file so he can activate it. And here Magnus plays the engine move. a6. Put it on the screen. Look at Magnus making this move. This move here is the engine's move. It's a really scary idea because what is Magnus doing as a strategic idea? He's waiting for Erigaisi to take the queen at some point. Improve his knight. And this knight goes to c6. There might even come a moment when Magnus can sacrifice the knight and start pushing both pawns forward. So, you have to plan for that, of course, but it's an idea for later on. This is positional chess at the highest level. And look how scary this is. Erigaisi took the queen. That's what the engine says. Raphael, give up chess. I can't understand it. He couldn't take that queen. Improving Neruga's knight. Exactly, but now you have no more options. With this formation, for example, if you just stay put, which is a normal idea, now Magnus is the one trading, unbelievable. That's what Erigaisi saw. Now I can play f4 and move the knight to c6 Raphael. But I can get ahead. I bring the rook to the file so that when you step here, I can activate my rook on the file that's opening up. Exactly. But that doesn't work. It's a logical, strategic idea. But it loses for tactical reasons, which is the move a6. Here it's lost. If you take here, you get forked. The pawn is super advanced on a 6. The best move now would be to sacrifice. Take back, and here you enter a lost endgame, where Magnus, look, this can't go unnoticed. Look how Magnus fixed the king side, the center, and he has 2 passed pawns. It's lost here. The game is over. It's over. There's no way to play here. That's why Erigaisi took on e5. It seems like a concession, but it's the only option he has to keep fighting. Magnus took back as expected and is now entering this square. Erigaisi played rook to c7, hoping Magnus makes a mistake to open the file, but that's not possible yet. Taking here means losing. So Magnus put the knight on c6. Now everything looks great. Everything is going well. Magnus is trying to prove that the knight is better than a rook, and so far he's convincing. But how does he win from here? Erigaisi stays put here, showing the Indian genius is already uncomfortable, even considering giving back the exchange. Magnus then plays the engine move f4, which stabilizes the position. The center is already fixed. Over there on the king side, we saw that this is important. Look at the positional chess. And Erigaisi played king f7, bringing the king into the game, Raphael. But here, Erigaisi was a bit naive, man. Why didn't he sacrifice? Look, he gave back the exchange to try to get ahead, but you lose, you get rook b8, and when the king moves, you're going to lose. Look, the a-pawn is lost, it's lost. Everything remains the same. I have a pawn on a 2 near promotion. There's nothing to do here. This position remains high level, so Erigaisi waits. King f7, Magnus reveals his plan and gives this check. It's a mystery, right? He placed the knight, then returned, gaining a tempo on the king. King f6, and now we'll see the plan. Magnus's plan began with a 6, that's brutal. Then he plays b6. Raphael, I see there's a little brilliancy in that move, but take that brilliancy out of there because here Magnus must be losing with a material disadvantage. It's forced now, of course, the capture. Erigaisi captured. You can't allow that pawn to get to b7, you'd be lost and have to capture. Magnus recaptured, but now a plan appears. Which one? Rook to a8, then a 7, you lose the pawn. So, Magnus ended up giving Erigaisi a plan against what could be a weakness. The pawn on a 6, but here comes this brutality. Not only from the evaluation, but the knight can also play. More than the rook or tactical evaluation, Magnus says this pawn will never fall. For tactical reasons, Raphael, I need that to be proven. Watch closely, Erigaisi played rook a8 to set up a capture. Actually, Magnus plays king f3, a move that seems impossible. He's passing the turn. Magnus is setting up g4, that's wild. Erigaisi played king e7 Raphael, I give up chess. I can't understand why he didn't choose that move. Winning the pawn, because like I said before, there's a tactical theme that prevents taking the pawn. The pawn is defended tactically through the move a rook to b7. Look how crazy that is, Raphael, what do you mean? But here I can take, and after the recapture, I come and take the pawn. It doesn't work. Look at the tactic. You lose the rook. Look how crazy that is. You can't go into this at all. Not at all, Raphael. But if I play this move against the rook instead of taking, then why not just take the pawn directly? That doesn't work either. You get checkmated. Neruga always seems to be one move ahead. In this case, two tactical systems defend the pawn. So look at what Magnus calculated to play this king to f3. Erigaisi saw it and moved the king away from the double threat, so there wouldn't be that check coming in here when the rook is over there on b. He escaped that situation. Now Magnus played g4. Watch the footage to see Magnus make this move. Everything seems calm, and once more, it looks like Magnus shouldn't be able to play here. Erigaisi already had 30 seconds on the clock, and at this moment, Erigaisi captured on g4 Raphael. I don't understand. Why did Erigaisi waste time capturing here instead of playing the rook move to a7 directly? But that move also loses the game because of this tactic. There's a direct tactic, the fork. You lose immediately here. Even without the fork, you can still play this move. It's crazy. After I check, if you capture and I recapture with the rook on b8, you get forked another way. It's chilling, man. Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. And worst of all, there's no way to get into this at all. So after g4, Erigaisi simply took, and Magnus recaptured with the king. This move is important because Magnus removes this square and recognizes the tactic with the f5 square. Erigaisi moved king to f6. Raphael, I didn't understand the thing about the d5 square. You'll understand now because at this moment Magnus plays rook to b7 and Erigaisi can't take again here. Notice that Erigaisi played this move. Raphael, but why doesn't he take? Again, he can't because I play this move and when you go there, you get forked and lose the game again. So after rook to b7, Erigaisi defended with this move, which forces Magnus to go back, and of course, Erigaisi repeated. So Magnus was just checking if Erigaisi was paying attention. There was a repetition, and Magnus comes up with a new plan, which is to play e4. Notice that he's concerned about the f5 square, and the answer will come next, which is the checkmate theme that appears here on f7. When Magnus's rook lands here, look, Erigaisi moves the king back to e7 Raphael again. But now, with e4 played, why doesn't Erigaisi play this move? It still doesn't work. And notice the importance of the f5 square. Magnus would have rook to b7 again. And you can't take here because you'll get checkmated. The king never has this square. The king holds, the pawn holds. There's nothing you can do. So after e4, Erigaisi tries again to get out of the double formation. Notice how the pawn never falls. It's extraordinary. And Magnus, king to f3, look at how calm he is. He plays, returns the king to f3, and Erigaisi resigns. He has no plan, just moves the king back and forth to f6, which won't end well. Magnus moves the knight to c6, and the pawn is close to a7 Erigaisi. Plays rook to d7. It's total desperation now. The position is already lost, strategically, and Magnus plays rook to b7, and there's no way to save it anymore. For the black pieces at this moment, because if you take here, you give up the rook and get checkmated. That's the idea behind e5. After rook f7, your king is trapped. At this moment, Erigaisi takes on d3, which is a totally desperate move. Magnus plays king g4, and Magnus's threat is mate with the move e5. It's not even about the knight or the passed pawn anymore. The king is just really bad on f6. Erigaisi played this move in total desperation, and here Magnus simply took and mate on the next move is forced. That's why at this moment, Erigaisi resigned. The game, because the only move is king e6, and you get checkmated. In fact, you can clearly see the moment of resignation. Magnus showed, proved, and justified that in this game the knight played better than the rook. Neruga defeats one of the best players in the world with a very unusual plan. Read a noir, this is the most absurd thing I've seen. Magnus in a Fischer random game, applying 97% pressure with a brilliant move. Rook to c3. Justified throughout the whole game. This quality sacrifice is very rare to see in a Fischer random game with such precision, especially when the quality sacrifice is proven through practice in the moves. Comment below what you think about all this, if you're as thrilled or amazed as I am. If you enjoyed the analysis, don't forget to like it and see you in the next videos. Subtitles by Adriana Zanotto.